Good evening, Vice Chair DeLima, members of the board, Dr. Kishimoto, and special guests. We'd like to extend our gratitude for this opportunity to present to you tonight the culminating report that was really a dedication to the collective effort of our Special Ed Task Force. So before we even go any further, may I ask to have the task force members recognized, and I'm going to ask them to all stand, please. And on the back of the booklet that we presented to you earlier are the membership and the role groups that are represented in this collective group of wisdom and insight. It was really an honor to be with this group. They put together their best thinking, and really with great diligence, it is our goal to represent to you tonight the recommendations going forward that we hope truly is about the significant issues, the aspirations, and the needs that need to be done on a very large scale as a system. We're not talking about incremental changes. We're really looking at adaptive, system-wide changes at all levels. So with that said, you have in front of you the history in which we began this process as a charge from the superintendent in November of 2017. Through that beginning point, we had met twice a month in full day meetings, and along with that, we also had our focus groups probably meet beyond that for additional hours. It took quite a while, but I think in the end, what you see here tonight is really a consensus that we built around how to move forward as a beginning point to stage ongoing continuous conversations and needs that will arise to really make the kinds of changes to address issues that you even heard in the testimony presented. So the task force charge was really where we first had to make sure that we understood what the current state was in terms of the needs around students with disabilities, as well as the practitioners in the field, along with the systems changes that had to happen at a larger level. It was really, again, then to make sure that we provided recommendations as well to ensure access and equity at a high level, where quality services, supports, and array of provisions of services are done with quality and done where it is customized to the individual students. I do want to have this one disclaimer that while we are true advocates in terms of making sure that we want to increase inclusive opportunities for our students, that decision making is done on behalf of the student by the IEP team. And along with that, we also want to make sure that while there is a goal in sight as a state with the superintendent's vision to reach 51% in 2020, that quantity cannot be compromised without looking very hard and deep at the quality that has to come in terms of the provision of services. I think it's very much recognized that while we have this beginning point of looking at inclusive practices and inclusion, we do also see that the student growth and achievement at this point in time is not rising commensurate. So that will have to be an important aspect and deep consideration going into the implementation stage over a long course of time. Okay. And here tonight again is what we will present to you related to our recommendations that we hope will address the deeper issues. What we started with, however, it was truly important for us as a task force to understand the core values and beliefs that we held as a task force. The reason this became even more significant is because we had a very diverse, very rich group of individuals who had brought together, again, very different experiences, but really made the kinds of hard questions that we put on the table, and at times had very animated discussions around how we would also rally to make sure we were steadfast in understanding where our focus was. And again, as you see in that first statement, it has to be around students, the students with disabilities, as well as part of their inclusion as we look at all kids having the entitlement and the right to have a quality education across the board. It is really about culture, it is about community, it is about understanding our collective responsibility to all our students and making sure that array of provision of services is equitable and at a level that is very customized as well based on needs both for the student and the community. And most of all, what the end result should always be is looking again at improvement and growth for all students. However, with that said, I think we often think about growth and only in the realm of perhaps academics. But as you know, in special education, we have a great array of vast differences in the students that we service. So in addition to learning growth, it's also one about satisfaction, about those who have quality lifestyles and independent living as they leave our years in the department, and also looking at the early childhood aspect at the very beginning point of as we begin this service over a long period of time.
Good evening. I just wanted to say thank you to the task force also. It was really a privilege and honor to work with all of you. So we took a lot of deep dives looking at data and finance, and we read research, and we looked at best practices. So we really were in the weeds, and then every once in a while our groups would have these big gestalts about these cross-cutting themes. And so the three big ones that came across were around equity, inclusive practices, and responsibility. And then if you look at the first word for each item, shared, 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 one of the big gestalts was that this is everyone's work. It's not a special ed teacher's work or a general education teacher's work or a parent's work or another stakeholder's work. It's everyone's work working together. So that's why we came up with these cross-cutting themes. So around equity, ensuring meaningful and relevant access for all children to rigorous and core curriculum resources and opportunities, around inclusive practices, shared learning, high quality practices, including local and national models. What we saw is that sometimes sitting in a group, one principal might say, because we have inclusive practices at our school and strong CTE programs, we've just about eliminated this need for special education resource types of settings. And then another principal right next to that principal will say, well, we can't do it at our school. We've got some barriers. So we've got a lot of work to do, but there are some good models in place across the nation and even in Hawaii. So that would be our goal. And then just the last one around responsibility is that this shared responsibility and accountability for this work. And so Donna's going to talk about 3 pillars right now that will put this work into action.
So as we began to organize the work in getting closer to consensus around what will we share as the big levers, as the compelling issues that we needed to push forward, there are 2 intersections related to how we organize this. So we're going to present tonight the themes or the components that we organized our recommendations under. However, along and within these themes, we also have 3 areas that we recommended, and they are represented again on the back side of your booklet. I think it's the back inside. And that would be where within each theme, you'll have short-term recommendations that would be implementation for school year 18 to 19. Then there are longer-term recommendations moving forward that might require deeper conversations, cross-sections, and networks across divisions, parties, stakeholders, and perhaps community engagement pieces. And then there are practices, protocols, or procedures that either need to be more consistently implemented and or improved. While we provided that categorization, I also want to make clear that they really are not distinct, and they are not definitely in silos. They are all interdependent upon each other and actually build on one category moving across that staging. So the first piece you see in front of you is designing a framework. And as we approached this work, it was really in alignment as well with the superintendent's program or school design. Ours was a program design, and as we shared the theory of action, which started with core beliefs and values, that as well is a tenet within the school design. So it was paralleling the school design as a programmatic piece and component. This designing a framework is the infrastructure. It was really vital that we began with understanding foundational pieces that had to set the course for the following components to follow and build upon. And what we present to you tonight is not an end-all, be-all. Like we said, it is a beginning point. It is the floor. It is not the ceiling. So as we move across these elements within these yellow circles, the first one is about a shared vision of inclusive education. We already have the superintendent's memo for November 2017 that talks about a vision for inclusion. But with that, this vision for inclusive education is one that would enable the vision to move forward. It speaks to the quality of the professional development, the common language and vocabulary. It speaks to making sure we have well-planned and thought-out transitions from early childhood up to and through and beyond the department. And it talks about capacity that involves community, families, and that partnership that links together. The second piece you have there is a statewide system of support, and that is where we would look at the 3 levels: the state level, the complex area or district, and the school. And what we found in conversations as well as our stakeholder outreach sessions is that there seemed to be a consistent agreement that we needed to improve and get better around our communication and also how we delivered different aspects for support and intervention at the 3 levels. It was often thought of as siloed or lacking clarity, and so what we really need to move towards is a coherence and alignment from school, complex, and state level. There are very distinct functions and responsibilities that come with each of these 3 levels, but there are also very clear common intersections and overlaps that also need to happen. So it's a bit of a balance of both. One of the strongest recommendations that I think came out of this as well is that as we did research, tried to look at data, there was also a realization that one of the gaps was perhaps at times not having the data at your fingertips, not having that timely access and comprehensive vetting of data that could inform our task force immediately. So the beginning point may be one in which we need to do a study that really looks at best practices, looks at personnel, looks at resource allocation, and looks at pieces that might, where we might need to provide that access to high quality professional development across all stakeholders better. Then the third circle you see there is about professional development. We've heard needs for that articulated tonight in the testimony. That takes on two pieces. There is a portion in which we have to make sure that we are meeting our federal obligations and requirements under the law and IDEA, and there is that aspect which again pushes on the quality to enable the practice for each of our educators, both general and special educators, to make sure they're operating and are supported at the highest level, that they have the best tools to deliver the quality that needs to be for all our kids. And the last circle you see here is probably the most significant, and that is around the funding allocation in which we provide that resource out to the complex areas or the districts. As you heard, currently we're operating under a proportional staffing allocation in which they use child count from the December of the previous years. And what the recommendation is that came out in full consensus is to move towards a redesign or a creation of one that is needs-based. It is one where we are looking at a base foundation that would be supplemented based on student characteristics. And while this is not a new concept, it is actually one where 10 states have some combination where they're looking at funding based on student characteristics. We also made sure we did our homework, that we weren't going down the wrong road and wasting time if this was not going to hold up in terms of meeting and aligning with federal regulations. So we did a lot of, we had a lot of conversations both during and after with our monitoring and compliance division, who also checked with the federal technical assist division to make sure we were lining up properly. So there are three components actually within this funding redesign. As I mentioned, it's the base funding formula that is looking at student characteristics. The second part is also acknowledgement that there will always be unique situations that occur, whether they're emergencies, such as on the Big Island, that there are high need areas, such as low incident situations, like medically fragile, deaf and hard of hearing, visually impaired, that there are remote areas and geographically isolated schools that really perhaps need some special consideration above and beyond the base allocation through student needs that we are recommending. So that is called, or what we refer to as a reserve risk, a risk pool reserve, risk pool reserve, okay? And it would be somewhat, again, for very unique situations. The third part that we also wanted to acknowledge is to see if there might be a means to acknowledge schools that might want to move forward by our department providing some supplemental funding, but also knowing that there would be a step down, so it's not a forever, but to acknowledge the best practices that are out there, or willing leaders who would say that we want to really look at how we're going to better use our existing resources to include students at all levels in inclusive quality education settings.
So then this is the first tier, and then the second, so designing the framework. So the next would be supporting transformation. So this counts on the framework being in place. So there is overlap. So we would look at adopting a tool to improve the quality of the IEP process. So that would be either refining or replacing the ECSSS system, and that's what teachers use to log their individual education programs, and it also could do a better job collecting data for us and helping us look at patterns. Another area would be professional development, so across state offices, complex areas, and schools, and there are all areas, all needs of professional development, from law and policy to understanding IEP development, instructional practices, and also how a special ed teacher and general education teacher work together and work with stakeholders. And around professional development, we were thinking about guarantees about what all teachers will know and be able to do. So getting a foundation with that. Also providing adequate time for care coordination and preparation. So we heard a little bit of that in the testimony, just with the tremendous workload that is involved in creating and presenting and holding IEP meetings, and then all of the teaching practices. So we are proposing some type of funding for either stipends or looking at master schedules to see how they can be better developed to provide release time to special ed teachers and their partner regular education teachers. And then the other one is building consistency on the placement calculation. So we know that across the nation, Hawaii is one of the lowest states. It has the lowest percentage of inclusion based on how we're inputting the minutes on our IEP. So probably a low-hanging fruit would be to get consistency about how we are implementing the minutes and get training in that area, and then work on more inclusive practices. So that's the second pillar about supporting. And then the third would be about sustaining these initiatives. So expanding partnerships. So really this is getting that pipeline of attracting teachers and keeping them and supporting them through partnerships with licensing and certification programs, expanding mentoring and networking for special ed teachers, so providing mentors who are special ed teachers, and then improving data collection and monitoring practices. Do you want to add anything to any of that?
And really, again, where this always comes back to in the design, our program design, is really making sure that while it's not here, but while moving into the implementation stage, that is all set for 18-19, in trying to then take these and really take action steps, it really is about showing measures that will improve and influence the student outcomes that we all need to see happen in front of us. And that is about the student learning, the products, and making sure that our students have a voice. So with that, we want to thank you for the opportunity and invite any questions that you might have for for either Lisa and I or any members of our task force.
Members, you want to go ahead? Thank you for all your hard work. One of the things that really struck me when I got this was that on how the funding allocation is done, because we've been under the impression that we weren't allowed to go back to the old way of doing it, and so you've pointed out that you've done your research and we can. So I guess I know that there's going to be an implementation plan, but is there any reason why the way the allocation is done can't be changed right away? Because
Yes,
that's one
there
of
are
the
reasons why. It takes coordination and putting the system in place, and the one commitment and one piece that I talked to at various levels and with various groups is the need to not only, as we put the new system in place, is also have a way of tracking that the dollars are going towards that purpose. And so we have to make sure we have that system in place. Next year, we should be doing that. We should build that out for implementation the following year. I talked to the Committee on Weights to get their involvement in finalizing the design. So it's not just about going back to something. It's about making sure that we design for what we've learned. And it may not be an exact what we had before. There are different models out there of doing this, but it'll be close to what we had at one point here.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that I had to go back to exactly how but I guess what I'm trying to say is on some of the implementation plan, it's going to take a long time to get to some of that. When you start talking about providing the appropriate training for our teachers, that takes a long time to get all of that and move a lot of that. But to me, changing this allocation, it should be one of the top priorities that we're looking at, because that's one of the things that has come up over and over and over again. The other thing is some of the testimony that we get tells me that people don't really understand what inclusion looks like and co-teaching looks like. And it's not two separate people in the same classroom and the kids are all divided up on the SPED kids go over here and the regular ed kids go over here. So there's a lot that needs to be done. The other point that needs to be very clear to everyone is that the board does not feel that inclusion works for all kids all the time. It's just that we need to do better in it, and by looking at what's appropriate for kids. But I can't reinforce enough that I think just working on that, and if we can get that done in a year, that would make a world of difference to a lot of people. That and the other thing of providing some extra time for people that have to do all of these IEPs and have to have all of these meetings. And it's not just the SPED teacher. It's both, because both, if they don't have any time to meet and work together, then co-teaching does not work. It's just two separate people in the same classroom, and we don't need that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Aldrich?
I would like to say that the library system would like to support the Department of Education in anything that you're doing so that we can reinforce and make sure that we're providing students and families with the resources they need outside of the classroom. So we would love to talk with whoever is leading any efforts to see how we can provide additional support from the library.
Thank you.
Mr. Kawano. You know, we heard tonight, and I've heard it outside of the meeting, about principals who have no experience in special education and who give their special education teachers no support. Basically, it's on-the-job training for the special education teachers. Can you speak to that with respect to the recommendations that are from the task force?
I think what we recognize, and it is reflected in the report and articulated as such, is that professional development is, first of all, it's job embedded, it's ongoing, and it will hit all stakeholders. I think we have to also make sure that as we develop some of these sessions, that when we are planning forward, it's not just like perhaps one person like myself sitting at a table and developing an agenda in isolation. It will probably have to include a group and who is responsive and representing pieces, like you said, that are perhaps coming and surfacing but we haven't maybe taken as much time to be attentive to. So how do we provide a comprehensive response around professional development that are not standalones, that are not drive-bys, but that perhaps really then also permeate the tri-levels we're speaking about, the school, the complex area, and the state. And we'll have to, with intention and purpose, build that in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to respond to that a little bit. I was not special ed trained, but we had inclusion in our classrooms, co-teaching like 20 years ago. So part of what I keep hearing is that, in fact, I think HSTA did a study, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and what came out of it was the schools that are doing really well with inclusion have principals that understand it and that are making it a priority. So I keep saying part of the training has to be so that our administrators understand exactly what we're talking about when we talk about inclusion. So we always talk about training for the teachers or the aides, but we sometimes forget that the administrators, you can't expect all administrators to have been special education teachers, because then what would happen with everything else if that was the only thing they knew? So administrators have to try to understand what's going on in all of it. And so that's why our high school principals have such a hard job, because that's really a tough job. But the whole point is all of us need to have that kind of in-service so that we understand what the whole process is.
Thank you. And I think the other thing I wanted to add is, again, as one point, a beginning point to offer towards that, is that at the Superintendent's Annual E Li this year, we will have 3 rounds or sessions around special education that will integrate some of the work and the findings you have here, as well as probably push on the issues that you just articulated.
Bruce.
Thanks for your all the time you spent. It's a very thought-provoking and thoughtful report. When we hear testimony from special ed teachers, the things that we hear over and over again is they don't have enough time. And so one of your recommendations that I'm most excited about is the one I'm just reading here. Towards this end, the department should enable schools to incorporate options such as 8 to 10 substitute days, recall pay, and additional release period, which I think are all great ideas. My question is, conceptually, is the task force suggesting that merely that the schools have the flexibility to use their WSF funds to do that, or were you anticipating an additional supplemental funding source either from the department or from the legislature?
I think what we're going to do is probably looking at both. But I think first and foremost, we need to look at our existing resources and make sure that we're using them well, strategically and wisely. I think we're going through that process right now with the superintendent's budget review at all levels across assistant superintendents. And so with that study or review, I think it'll probably enable us to review where perhaps we might have to make some shifts in funding some of these pieces that are presented today. What we wanted to make sure we did not do as well, though, is while we felt that this aspect of support for care coordination that would enable articulation and collaboration between general educators and special educators, is that we did not want to be prescriptive, but we did want to offer pieces that begin to say these are not limited to. There are other aspects that are probably built in currently, like many schools already have existing structures around articulation, regular cycles of articulation. Some of the high schools might even want to look at perhaps double, or secondary schools, middle and high schools, might even want to consider double prep periods that perhaps don't have a fiscal investment on it, but it is one that would allow for release of time to begin to build more recognition and resources for that kind of care coordination. I definitely feel that pain. Now, I will tell you, I'm a former special ed teacher myself, and so I do truly understand where that heavy lift comes from.
Colonel.
Hey, thanks very much, and that is quite the report that you put together, too. It's very easy to follow and understand. And I see the way that you have those who put this thing together accountable for how it's supposed to be used. So is there still some sort of time limit so they can come in and re-engineer it so it actually does work? Because it seems like if it's that bad, there's got to be some sort of accountability to make it useful again. And I'm not sure how quickly that can be done, because last time when we work with systems, it's quite an arduous task to get that thing put together. So any comments on that would be useful. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to answer that question. We in Hawaii use a local contractor to design our system. That's ECSSS, that's what it's called. The challenge with using a locally designed system for a program of this scale and responsibility that has federal laws and mandates attached to it is that that local vendor is not necessarily attached to responding to changes and mandates from the federal government the way that some of the nationally utilized vendors are attached and will make updates which impact everyone who's using that system. And so it's not a vendor-specific issue in terms of quality. It's a choice that we made here to go that route, rather than use a more nationally norm model. We do already pay for Infinite Campus, which is already has modules that allow us to do this work on something we pay for already. So the first thing we're going to do is review an internal system that is used nationally, that is connected to those federal changes in terms of federal laws, so that every time we need to make a change to the system because of a federal law change, every other district in the nation is looking to the same vendor that we would use for that, rather than having to pay for something that has to be changed for us specifically here. So I think it's a matter of really aligning with what the rest of the nation's already doing in this area in terms of having a system for that. So it's really about how we made our choices here and really starting to shift now. Yeah. It's old, and the vendor has been great in working with us, and so that's why I say it's not about the vendor, it's how we have elected to continue to do this work.
Well, I do want to say thank you for the participation of all the task force members. This is a priority of the board, a priority of the strategic plan, a priority of the superintendent, and I can sense a priority of all those who have come today that recognize the importance to help our most vulnerable students be able to function and value their school, as well as prepare them for involvement and participation in life and in their community in the future. Having said that, though, I do want to state that we had testimony that really, when you read it and when you're a parent of a special needs child, it kind of really tugs at you. And really what it comes right down to is we have this task force that has great recommendations. The superintendent is going to do a great job in terms of implementing. But when you read the struggles that some parents have in terms of their view of their student receiving services, and then when you hear that they're in an elementary school setting and they're being told that they have to go to a resource room for most of their educational day and not in an inclusion setting, it really tugs at you. Now, I understand that, as Ms. Cox pointed out, that an inclusion setting is not necessarily for all the time or for everyone. But when you read the testimony of a parent who talks about their experience in not having their child included in an inclusive setting, it really is a cause of concern. So I think what it really comes right down to is we can have the best plans and have the best intentions, but true implementation is really going to be dependent upon talented principals like yourself, Ms. DeLong. You do an excellent job at your school, tremendous leadership. And teachers, like Mr. Huey and others who really have that type of dedication that makes a parent feel welcomed, involved, and they believe that there's empathy about their personal situation. And I think that's what we need more than anything else, is that empathy, understanding that parents are frustrated, they have difficult situations, and they want to be heard and involved in their child's education. And when it all is working together, everybody is happy. The student, the parent, the school, they all pull together. And quite frankly, the words on the pieces of paper really don't really matter at that point, because everybody's pulling together. So I just want to, point out that we have a lot of students that are doing really, really well, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that these plans, these task force, these efforts really don't speak to the need to really understand the individual need of the student, and to understand, and especially if we can deal with the parents who are the most difficult, the most frustrated, we solve their problems, we solve the whole problem of special education. But the truth of the matter is that we just got to keep understanding that there are a lot of people struggling, and I know everybody's heart is in the right place. So if we continue to pull together and view special education and as a service, not a place, I think we'll be going in the right direction. And I know the superintendent